Sorry, I have to start quite close in because I have to sit upstairs because basically the light downstairs is awful, and that means starting like really close up to the video, so I thought I would creep you all out at the beginning of this video. Right, so this video is pop culture and the goddess Morrigan, the evolution of goddess. A lot of people have been talking a little bit more about kind of the pop culture side of witchcraft lately. The incredible Molly from Her Speak is, of course, the cultivator in at least modern times of the examination of the sort of the pop culture influence on witchcraft, and Deviant Witches talked about it as well, I believe. And I was thinking about this the other day and thinking about the evolution of goddess. Now I'm going to be focusing on the goddess Morrigan because my relationship is with the goddess Morrigan and I can give examples of it. But I think you can apply it to many pagan gods and goddesses, and the evolution of how we see, contact, focus, channel gods and goddesses in a more modern sense, and sort of pop culture references to these gods and goddesses. So I've written some notes, so if I'm looking over here, that's where my notes are, just to make sure I get everything across, because I actually did notes for this video. I wanted to make sure I got my points across. So talking about pop culture is sort of a modern branch of paganism. It's like a influence on how we interact with symbolism, with imagery. It was almost idols in some cases, you know, that sort of flies in the face of the more traditional presentation of what paganism and witchcraft is, in terms of, you know, the visual aesthetic in particular. When you think about the aesthetic of what witchcraft is and what paganism is, you tend to get a kind of medieval, natural, nature-based presentation of imagery. There is a lot of that kind of medieval portrayal of witchcraft, and in your more traditional witchcraft, you know, books and images and presentations, there may well be, you know, wood cuttings from the medieval times. It may be books and images from printing presses around medieval areas, and then you'll get sort of the more modern but yet referencing back to the medieval perspective, and it will largely be nature-based, and you might get medieval garb, medieval clothing, as a presentation, and sometimes it borders into a little bit more of a gothic-y medieval aesthetic as well, which we'll talk a little bit about in a bit. But with the more pop cultures, it's a definite change from that aesthetic. It's sort of a modern palette of symbolism is what I've got down here. Whereas traditional aesthetics, draw from sort of a darker toned picture, and then, you know, it's a lot more based in nature, so it tends to be the dark nature side. It tends to be the earthy browns and greens, and then, you know, your blacks and your nighttime and that sort of thing. Pop culture-y references are lighter, brighter, more vibrant, and quite often a bit more chaotic. Anything goes kind of style. It draws across culture a lot more. I think, you know, your more traditional witchcraft in mainstream imagery tends to get presented from a European perspective, I would say, and it tends to follow that aesthetic a lot more, with that kind of landscape behind it. And whereas this modern pop culture is this anything goes, bright, vibrant, colourful, and it draws from many, many different mediums as well. So you can get things such as comics, TV shows, I should say, rather than just TVs, or even, you know, TV adverts and things like that, video games, films, magazines, so on and so forth, and it's a much more modern presentation of what you can draw into your path, into your sort of modern perspective. Given that Goddess Morrigan is such a primal, ancient presence, it might on the surface of it seem to be odd to think that she can be present in a pop cultural aesthetic. But it's simply not true, and she comes through very much so, in my mind, in what the singer Curly, I think it's Curly, Kerli, coined as a term, as a bubblegum goth, which is her style, is how she describes her style. If you haven't heard some of the songs from Curly, I tend to share them on my Facebook page and on the Starry Eyed Facebook page. The most recent one she did Feral Hearts and she did Blossom. And Blossom is about, the video is about the nature spirits, the nature devas from her home land of Estonia, and the video for Feral Hearts is about the pagan roots, the pagan stories of Estonia, and showing gods and goddesses and things in that video, and it's so interesting, it's so witchy, it's so pagan, it's interesting, and it's well worth going and listening to those videos and watching those videos just for that aesthetic. Now that aesthetic is, interestingly enough, a little bit more in the traditional camp. It's not kind of like the bubblegum pop that she is so famous for. Bubblegum goth, sorry, not pop. She has this kind of crossover. Some of her songs are a bit darker, and then some of them are a little bit more vibrant, trying to get a little bit more mainstream at the minute, I think. But they're lovely, and that kind of idea of the bubblegum goth interests me because it kind of draws from the modern pop aesthetic and then pulls from this kind of gothic aesthetic, which is perhaps a little bit older than the bubblegum gothic, because you can trace this sort of gothic from, you know, some of it's some kind of a Victorian era aesthetic, and some of it is more to do with the horror genre, and you can find examples of the Goddess Morrigan, at least to my eyes, in all these mediums, in, you know, in TV, in comics, in video games, films and magazines. A lot of the more modern portrayals through which we glimpse shades of the Morrigan do tend to adhere to a darker, more perhaps gothic tone, sometimes bloody, sometimes spectral, although there are examples where she crosses over into popular consciousness, and I have made some notes about a few examples that I want to talk about, modern pop culture references that are either drawing from the Morrigan as a sort of inspiration, or they're just downright are the Morrigan, and then it's sort of like a modern portrayal. Now this starts off because of the new Harry Potter. So I've already shared this on the Facebook page, that on Pottermore, the site by J.K. Rowling, she has released one of the, would you call it cartoon? It was like in the final movie, and it's kind of a animated short of silhouettes to tell a story, and it was in the final Harry Potter movie. And she's released another one of those to talk about the history of Ivermony, the American Hogwarts. And the American Hogwarts is founded by an Irish woman descended from the famous Irish witch Morrigan. So as of two or 3 days ago, when this was released, it suddenly became very prevalent in my mind about the pop culture, in this case J.K. Rowling, bringing in the wizarding world, which is a hugely popular worldwide phenomenon, which is now referencing Morrigan. Granted, here it's the Irish witch Morrigan rather than the Irish goddess Morrigan, but you can see how that would fit easier within the fabric of the Harry Potter storyline, and as well as Salazar Slytherin's who she hooked up with, apparently. So she hooked up with a guy who was snaky and dubious, which is interesting. You know, but then again, that's to further the story of that particular Potter related pop culture referencing. It's just amazing to me, really, because she's been everywhere lately, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But first of all, yes, she is here presented as a witch. However, Morrigan's powers are sorceress based. She had magical powers, magical abilities. Prophecy is the main one, but there was calling down the elements. There is raining blood on the enemies, shape-shifting, and there are many sort of gifts of the Morrigan talents of the Morrigan that she had, that lend themselves to a witch archetype, which fits easier with that particular storyline. So that was the thing that sort of triggered this video. I'd been thinking on and off over the years to make this video about. It started off sort of talking about the sort of artistic representations of the Morrigan in sort of art terms, and then it kind of evolved into this. So I was actually talking about video games and the Goddess Morrigan with somebody yesterday, and we ended up talking at length about Skyrim. And I'm not going to talk about Skyrim again because we did this all yesterday, and there are 2 doves that have just landed over there. Hello. I haven't seen doves in a very long time. There are 2 doves over there on that roof. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about Skyrim. If you're interested, we were talking initially about the Daedra Nocturna as being a representation of the goddess Morrigan, and I said, well, what about the goddess Azure, Daedric goddess Azura, who is a goddess of the dawn as well as the dusk, the twilight, the in-between places, and she also has, she does not like the undead, and I was sort of hypothesizing that as a representation of Morrigan in a modern sense, Morrigan wouldn't like undead because it is her role to take the souls of the honourable warriors to the afterlife in order that they be reborn. Therefore, she probably would be against the undead because that would be kind of a sacrilege against her natural role and life, death and rebirth and the cycles. So, let's just move the camera slightly as the light changes. Oh, now it started doing its thing where it... Yeah. So we talked about that at length, so I'm not going to talk about that again. But I will mention 2 other video game sources. Firstly, The Witcher 3 has Yennefer, and particularly in the cinematic in-game trailer, I believe it is, she is shown as a powerful witch amidst a battle scene. She has familiars or magical familiars that are crows that come in the midst of battle and attack her enemies through the eyes, through the sight. So that's very Morrigan-esque for obvious reasons. Some of her magic involves the earth swallowing up her enemies, which is very Morrigan-esque in tone. And one of her familiars, so they kind of run out. They're like magical crows, and they kind of run out. And then it drops a stone on the ground, and the stone is a crystal of a raven or crow head that is left on the ground. And technically, Witcher 3 draws heavily from Scandinavian and Slavic lore, specifically, which I've always found a really interesting part of this, and Skyrim draws from Scandinavian lore, I believe. And there's actually been university courses discussing the sort of rise of Nordic and Scandinavian lore within video games and their role within the sort of modern retelling of ancient myths. So Yennefer from that is one, and when I watched the original trailer I was like, oh my god, she's And I was there, and there's crows and there's horses. She's on a horse at one point as well, of course, which is another Morrigan animal. And so there were crows and horses and her black hair and oh. And another one, and it kind of telling of these three games that I've mentioned, are kind of telling of my video game style, is from Dragon Age. And this is the Witch of the Wilds, Morrigan. She actually has the name Morrigan. She's a powerful woods witch. She's sexual, she is proud, she is fierce, she's unforgiving, and she's a shapeshifter. She actually gives birth in the storyline to a powerful creation. So there's the whole giving birth aspect that is prevalent in the Morrigan myths. The Morrigan did have sons and daughters, according to the myths, some of whom were considered unpleasant. And Morrigan in the video game actually dresses how you would imagine the goddess Morrigan might, in a very blood wine coloured, and she has raven feathers about her shoulders, and she has a traditional sort of wooden stave, if you like, that crosses over, and she's very much portrayed and looks like how we might expect the Morrigan to show up. And then as my final example from modern pop culture references is a television show which has recently finished, which is Lost Girl. And Lost Girl is about a succubus who is an unaligned succubus because she refuses to join either the Dark Fae or the Light Fae. And initially the Dark Fae are led by the Morrigan. And it actually turns out that the Morrigan within that is actually more of a title rather than the Dark Fae that who is called Morrigan, although they kind of gloss over that later and just keep calling her Morrigan. And of course the goddess Morrigan was considered in some cases to be a sort of queen figure to the Fae because of the sea, which is how, spelled S-I-D-H-E, which is how sort of the Christianization of the Celtic myths became Fae. So the gods became Fae, and some will argue that they were always Fae, and so that they're both, and so on and so forth. But Lost Girl's a really interesting show about good versus bad, and they explore some really wonderful open themes of sexuality in that show as well, with Bo, the succubus, basically being bisexual, having relationships with both a male and a female. And it's interesting how all these different portrayals of the Morrigan in that show, she's bad for the most part. She's very, very clever, she's very, very cunning, she's very, very sexual, very preoccupied with her appearance, and her appearance is always fierce. So I always quite enjoyed watching when the Morrigan came on the show. Some people might not like her being a bad fae, but they do kind of explore in that show how you picked light or dark, and the light and dark things tended to be about how you viewed human beings, and whether or not they were aggressive towards human beings or not. And then it kind of looked at whether or not these concepts were a little bit restrictive and a little bit unfair, and how there were good dark fae and bad light fae, and it was good. I really enjoyed it. It kind of tailed off a bit in the final season because Kenzie needed to be in the show to make it, because Kenzie was the best character. She was amazing. So those are some sort of pop culture references from modern medium, and by pop culture sort of references and things, you can look at different things. You can look at like comic book heroes and see elements of your god and goddess in them, and bring them into your altar space. And Molly talked about this with Wonder Woman in her videos. But I was thinking, if I was going to look at a comic book heroine that mostly resembled how I felt about the Morrigan, where would we go from there? And I think there are kind of two. There's kind of the Scarlet Witch from the Marvel series, and there's the Lady Death, who Thanos is in love with, and she shows up in a lot of the Deadpool stuff, and that's more of a comic that's not showed up in the movies or anything yet. So if you've and I've not read the comics properly, I've just kind of researched and read about a lot on the internet, so I can't tell you all the different storylines. I don't know anything because I'm not that good, but those are two presentations that I thought kind of echoed themes of the goddess Morrigan in a modern perspective, in a modern image, and I thought that was really kind of interesting. And I was thinking about, along these lines, that how we interact, how we present the relationship with deity, and how that evolves in terms of a modern sense, and whether or not these pop culture references are part of the evolutionary process that keep pagans interested, keep paganism evolving and growing, and keeps the evolution of gods and goddesses who evolve. Now, naturally, it's always worth noting that we see what we want to see. So we interact with art forms, all art forms, be they ancient art forms, be they, you know, the wood cuttings of old, be they further back than that, classical representations of gods and goddesses, you know, actual historical memorials or monuments or things that we can physically see in terms of gods and goddesses. And for the Celts, that's not a lot because a lot of it was destroyed, and they were largely oracular. Or if it's modern art forms, but no matter what medium we're looking at, we are looking through our own personal lens. So I will see the goddess Morrigan. I will be actively seeking out art that speaks to me of the goddess Morrigan. Basically, I create the need, I create the gap in which is filled by the market out there, or the artists out there, or the art that's already there. It appeals to what I'm looking for on an conscious and an unconscious level, and when it resonates, that's to do with how I've interacted with that particular art piece. And online, on my Facebook page, I have it's a photo album, but I consider it to be a sort of online shrine to the goddess Morrigan, and I will actively, on so many occasions, go searching for artwork that speaks to me of the goddess Morrigan, and I put that into that folder in an online and share it, and that's kind of like an online space, an online shrine, an online offering of art that on some level, be it very, very obvious or a little bit more abstract, speaks to me of some element, some aspect of the goddess Morrigan. And I've talked about this online photo album shrine idea before, and other people do it. And I think it's a nice way to have something there even when you're on your computer, especially if you work on your computer like I do, and it's just a little, she's honoured right there in that cyberspace that connects to hundreds of millions of other people maybe, and it's just a different way of bringing in sort of modern pop culture-y, modern technology, and creating kind of a space for an ancient primordial goddess within cyberspace. And that in and of itself is like a modern aesthetic, a modern way of interacting, a modern worship, a techno worship if you like, of a very primal goddess, a very ancient goddess. It's a new way of looking at things. But I will look at art and I will see the goddess Morrigan in it, and some people may not. They may look at art and they see their particular god or goddess, and they might not see any god or goddess in it. They might be like, yeah, that's not my jam, I don't like that image, that image is too gothic, that image is too bubblegum, that image is not kind of what I think of as being goddessy, Morrigan-y, and so forth. So there is obviously this personal kind of mission where you kind of go looking for the elements of the goddess within pop culture. So I think it is a kind of chicken and egg situation, where is it the followers of the Morrigan are perpetuating the evolution of her representation because they go searching for that art and they keep talking about her and they keep sharing about her and whatnot? Or is it just the evolution of a goddess providing herself as being a shapeshifter, an evolutionary being, and provides that inspiration into the minds of people who may or may not know about her properly, who may or may not follow her at all, who may or may not have pagan leanings, and she just gets in there and she just, you know, just tweaks with her little inspiration process, and then there she is in a video game, in a television series, or so on and so forth. I like to think both. I like to think that, you know, we as sons and daughters of the Morrigan do perpetuate the imagery. We do go looking for it, so therefore we create a kind of gap in the market and artists fulfill it for us. And also I think that, you know, she likes to get her own way. Don't smite me. Okay. But in more recent years, I think she has become more and more prevalent, more and more visible, more and more viewable. There's definitely a resurgence going on. There's definitely more people discussing her. There's the rise in the prominence of the American retreat dedicated to her. I want to go so badly, but it's in America. And I think this is because war and death, which are two but not an entirety of her aspects, are basically themes that aren't going away. They are intrinsically linked. Oh gosh, have I had that black... there we go. Sorry, that might have been off-putting if you're watching this video. War and death are two themes that are intrinsically linked to human beings, human kinds, and you know, war and death are never going away. At least not in our lifetime. I mean, you could theorise that it's possible in a kind of more utopian future, but violence and death are just elements of life. They are themes that are explored. And Crow's messages also don't, messengers and tricksters and magicians don't go away. They tend to pop up in every literary age. You can think of some really famous literary art or poetry or storytelling, excuse me, that incorporates Crow's messengers. You can go back and you can think Edgar Allan Poe. You can think right now Game of Thrones, the Crows being messengers. And side note of Game of Thrones, that Bran, Three-Eyed Raven, Bran is obviously a crow-related god from the Celtic mythos. So the Celtic mythos as well as the Morrigan mythos does stick. You know, the portrayals of Morgana Le Fay as a priestess in the Arthurian legends, and some theorise that she is associated with the goddess Morrigan. Some refute it and throw it out with the bathwater out of hand. But whether or not you believe it, the Arthurian legend with Morgana in it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back in terms of storytelling, in movies, in TV, in art forms. It is in our consciousness. It just does not go away. And if it is based in Celtic mythos, which I believe it is, it's difficult to prove one way or another because of the oracular nature of the Celtic mythos being so prevalent that a lot of Celtic myth is lost. But it just doesn't go, and it just goes, it doesn't fade. It gets stronger and stronger and comes back in cycles and cycles of time, very much like the goddess herself with her life, death and rebirth ideas. It keeps resurging, and these sort of modern references, these modern interpretations, these modern connections to the goddess sort of provide us with the evolution of a goddess whose themes are really, really primordial, life, death and rebirth. These are things that human beings have been preoccupied with since the dawn of time, most likely, since we were sentient enough and since we began to philosophize. I think that's right, philosophize. I think philosophically. whichever. That, and you know, ancient Greeks and even before then, ancient Egyptians were trying to unravel the mysteries of the universe and mysteries of magic and gods and goddesses, and death being the great unknown. So I think that a lot of the time, many gods and goddesses who have a death element kind of have that kind of fear element. People are kind of afraid of them. Sometimes the art perpetuates that. It's kind of gothic-y and spectrally. And a lot of the art that you get with Morrigan is either very, very bloodthirsty or very, very spectral, ghost, gothic-y. And I think those are the two that are prevalent. They're not the only ones. You do get some interesting Celtic warrior art. There's been a lot more of that in recent times. Whether I'm coming across it more because I'm looking or because there is more of it. Again, chicken and egg. There's been a lot more of that kind of Celtic art of a warrior, of, you know, warrior women. Sometimes it's a bit bloody, but it doesn't tend to be as bloody. And then you get your kind of more rose-tinted glasses with your Celtic women in long flowy dresses, and that kind of more romanticised element of Morrigan that shows up. That's not been as popular in more recent years. It was quite popular a couple of years ago. I used to come across more of that kind of Avalonic energy with regards to Morrigan a little bit more. It's been a little bit more war and death again lately, a little bit more gothic-y, a little bit more edgy, in terms of these sort of pop references. But you do get your more bubblegum gothic things and sort of, you know, comic portrayals, as in comic books rather than funny comic, although, you know, it's not outside of the realms of possibility to get sort of more amusing tales of Morrigan. There was another animated video of the Morrigan recently, and I can't remember where that was from, and it was a telling of a tale of her being in love with a man, and I've never heard of it, so I'm guessing it was kind of made up. As far as I know, it's made up, but that's, again, you know, just another pop culture retelling of some kind of story involving the goddess Morrigan and bringing awareness to her as a goddess, and as a result the interest in her is surging. And I just had a flash of light in front of my eyes, so I wonder if that's on camera or if that's just me and my hay fever again, or the goddess again. You're talking about me, I'm here. I am evolved. I keep evolving. So what I was really trying to throw out there is this idea that gods and goddesses, particularly of a pagan denomination in my mind, evolve. And they don't, particularly shape-shifting goddesses such as the goddess Morrigan, to whom it comes naturally. You know, they shift and change with the era and the age and the evolution. And that doesn't throw out the more traditional aspects of looking at the mythos or anything like that. That's not what we're getting at. Because I know some people think that you need to stick to the Celtic myth, like jam on bread, I don't know, and never examine anywhere outside of the box with those things. But I don't think that the Morrigan is a goddess that can be contained to ancient Celtic myths. I think she grows, I think she evolves alongside humanity. I think that if you're looking for her, you're going to find her, especially in art. I think art is something I wish I could do because it's such a beautiful presentation of the goddess and keeps her myth alive. So there we go. So I'm going to get close up to the camera again, just to finish. Shall we finish how we started? Goodbye. Many blessings.